Well, really is a pleasure for me to be here with you all, the Feagin scholars. I've been supportive and enthusiastic about this program since it began back in, I guess, around 2009. As you all know, John Feagin was the first medical student from West Point that graduated. He was a year ahead of me in medical school here at Duke, so we knew each other very well. And then Dean Taylor, as you heard, we selected him as a resident, and he was one of our outstanding residents and continues to be involved in the leadership role he is. His office is right next to mine, so I get to talk to him all along. I've also continued to serve on the advisory board for the Feagin Scholars. I helped pick some of y'all. I hope I didn't make too many mistakes. And then Joe Doty, who one of his offices, he has a bunch of offices, I think. He's near me, and he drops by and talks to me 3 or 4 times a week, and we exchange thoughts. I couldn't find a picture that made him look good. So really, I'm no stranger to this program, and the title, 12 Reflections of Inspirational Relationships, it's a natural. Because these are my toes up here. If you count them, 6, I have 12 toes. So, I mean, what else? I'm from West Virginia. You know, I could never do This Little Piggy Went to Market. It never came out right. I thought I had a defective mind or something. Well, Dean's mentioned I've given this talk similar to it several times at meetings like this, but I've changed it and updated certainly for the audience and for the time changes. But as I was reflecting on this topic, it was apparent how defining these many relationships have been and still are, as very few of my comments will be original, but from family, friends, teachers, colleagues, patients, lectures, and the written word. You know, I read somewhere where you copy one paper, it's plagiarism. If you copy a whole bunch of papers, you're an academician. But you're going to hear from me. So I've been actually fortunate to serve in many or several leadership positions. But in the end, really, it's much more than that. These recognitions and awards clearly don't define one's gratification and success. But for sure, lasting quality friendships, relationships do. You know, there was a recent study. You live longer if you have strong relationships. Not only longer, but a healthier life. This study was done 270,000 people in 100 different countries. And what they find out, well, if you have good, strong relationships, you live longer, you live healthier. Even more important than family ties, which is kind of hard to believe. So my first reflection, my father, where it all started, like many of you all. I learned compassion and care from my dad as I watched him hand out $5 and $10 bills. That was a lot of money in those days, to out-of-work coal miners in West Virginia in their dark days. Dad's generosity in helping the needy truly made an impression upon me. I'd actually signed a grant-in athletic scholarship to go to one school, but I changed it to the University of Kentucky, where I could play where my dad did. I think we were the first, probably the first father and son to play there. You know, Dean Taylor was introducing me, and he wanted in a meeting somewhere, and he wanted some pictures from my wife and stuff. So she gave me some pictures, and he said, "This was Jim Urbaniak when he played." I said, "Dean, I didn't wear leather helmets in my day." And it was 30 years after that. Well, so I learned strength as well as compassion, strength and leadership from my father. He told me in my younger years of playing football that he never wanted to see me carried off the field. So I mean, we never laid down in those days like they do now.
Players different today? Now,
I don't know, because I don't play today, you know. They get hurt, they lay on the for 15 minutes, and you got the chaplain and the assistant chaplain, and you got the trainer and his assistant, and the equipment man out there. I don't know what the hell he's out there for. And after 15 minutes, the guy jumps up and runs off the field.
Y'all are too young to remember the John Carson show. But that's true. And, you get your arm hurt, you lay down for 10 minutes. I never could understand that. Well, as a leader, you have to be strong and able, even though you may not feel like it at times. For example, Joe DiMaggio, one of my childhood heroes, was asked why he played so hard, even when he was hurt. And what did he say? There's always some kid out there who may be seeing me for the first time or the last time, and I owe him my very best. Reflection number 2. Actually, I learned a similar lesson from my stern, stout high school teacher, Miss Bunsen-Burner. I had a severe flu one time, and I was sitting in the back row coughing and sneezing, had my head down, and she signaled me out in the back and said, "Somebody in the back row acts like he's dying. We got some work to do here." Well, I was mortified because I was one of her good students, and I have to say that was the last time I ever tried to get sympathy from anybody. Seriously. So these comments stuck with me, and they helped me appreciate that no matter how bad you feel, whether you're injured, ill, down, angry, tired, you've got to maintain that strong appearance and controlled emotions to be a leader. I am the doctor, they are the patients. As Dr. Goldner used to say, my mentor, the patient is sick, not you. This same control of your appearance and emotions must be maintained in front of the residents or students and faculty. No matter if you've been up all night or even 2 or 3 nights, as I experienced during a good part of my career. I was up 2, 3, or 4 nights all night long doing replants. One year we did 180 replantations. It was back in the early 80s. That's one every other night. Usually took all night to do. So, you got to shave, shower, and appear fresh. Your colleagues know how hard you worked. You don't have to make a fuss over how hard you worked or how honest you are. Just work hard and be honest. Reflection number 3, college coaches. What I learned most was not to make excuses if you want to be successful at any level of the chosen field. I learned this early in my football days at Kentucky, where I fumbled the football in practice, and Ermo Allen, who was our offensive coordinator, was a perfectionist. He was all SEC, football, basketball, and golf, all 3 of them. And he yelled at me for fumbling, and I said, "Coach, the quarterback never even got me the ball." And boy, did he jump on me. He said, "Urbaniak, I wanted to see if you could be a football player." Well, I learned then that never to make excuses. Never again in my life did I make excuses. This made a lasting impression on me, for sure. And by the way, I was fortunate to have be influenced by some of the great coaches in football. This picture was in Sports Illustrated. These were my coaches while I was there. Ed Rutledge, became the head coach of the New York Giants. Howard Schnellenberger was the head coach of the University of Miami when they won the national championships, NCAA championships. Also, he was at Baltimore when they won with the Colts when they won the championship. Ermo Allen, I mentioned, was all SEC in 3 sports, backup quarterback to the famous Otto Graham for the Cleveland Browns, and the offensive coordinator for Landry when they won the Super Bowl. Blanton Collier, our head coach, went on to become coach of the Cleveland Browns, and they were world champions. This was before the Super Bowl. Don Shula, head coach at Miami, Super Bowl champions. John North, head coach of New Orleans Saints. Chuck Knox, head coach of LA Rams, Seattle Seahawks, and Buffalo. And lastly, Bill Arnsparger, who was the head coach of the New York Giants and later became the AD at LSU. You would think with this coaching personnel, we'd have won a few more ball games. We didn't do all that well for sure. So I learned more than just football from these outstanding men and highly successful leaders. For example, teamwork, no excuses, perform under pressure, and most of all, how to handle adversity. And certainly in Lordy, I've had experienced some of that. Playing on a team of any kind, at any level, strengthens relationships, builds character, and gives confidence. After playing football and before crowds and on TV, and back there when you played a football game on TV, you were the only game on. It was maybe 2 games on Saturday. That was it. This really helped me. I think, never got uptight in the operating room. Operating was always a very, very relaxing experience for me. Reflection number 4. Well, let's go back a few years to high school again. Like most medical students, and you all, I was a good student, played some ball, but it was not my association with student leaders in athletics or academics that influenced my thoughts on life and understanding people, but rather some relationships with some underachievers with whom I developed some very strong relationships. My hometown of Fairmont, West Virginia, was made up of a collection of immigrants from various European countries who'd come to work in the coal mines. Y'all don't appreciate this, but in 1920, coal mining industry was the #1 industry in the United States. And we were the heart of the bituminous coal, that's soft coal. Pennsylvania was anthracite coal, hard coal. And by the way, Nick Saban, the successful coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, is from our hometown. So is Robert Fitch. Yeah, Dr. Fitch is from there. Well, Fairmont was best known for its pepperoni buns. For sure, it was not a culinary delight because a magazine had listed the #3 restaurant in Fairmont as the Dairy Cream. True. Well, I was accepted in this club that was not really a gang of these individuals who had not excelled or were not outstanding in academics or athletics, but they were a close-knit group who trusted each other. They were called the Kaibos. They had a song called My Buddy. They never broke the law, at least collectively. They were guys like Lilacs, Bootsy, and Fats. They had a code of honor of trusting one another. And I related well with these guys, although few, if any, went on to higher education. Well, 2 actually did go to jail for stealing a state Caterpillar. Can you believe it? I mean, how dumb can you be? But they eventually got off. Well, what was the outcome of this group, and why am I telling this story? Well, when I was in medical school, I returned back there, and a young doctor in my hometown, and we got together and we transformed this group of basically non-achievers whose only mission in life was to have a good time into a respected society. They became involved in community service. We did not give up on these guys. You've heard the expression that today's mighty oak was yesterday's nut that held its ground. Well, in the coal mining area of West Virginia, we say a diamond is simply a piece of coal that stuck with it. Along with this, reflection number 5, Tony Spadoni. Well as Bootsy, Lilacs, and Fat, there was an Italian named Tony Spadoni, who was my boss when I worked cutting filth, as we called it then, or weeds along the highways. Anybody ever use one of these? The side? That's what we cut it with, the side like that. I worked for 3 summers along with Tony Spadoni. I'm not singling out Italians because as Polacks, we weren't welcomed in our country club either. And actually, as I mentioned, a couple of you guys, half of my family are Italians. Our residents, when I was in practice, they all knew Tony Spadoni. They heard he was this 60-year-old guy that I thought was ancient at the time, but he was originator of such phrases as keep it a go and justa, which meant everything was all right. Well, at the end of the day, after I'd cut weeds on my side, and he'd cut them on the other side of the street, at 4 o'clock, it never failed. He would come over and retrim my side. And that used to irritate the hell out of me because he thought I could not cut weeds as well as he. Tony Spadoni. Well, what did I learn from this? I learned a couple of things. That I made it a point in the operating room not just to polish over the operation if what the resident fellow did maybe didn't totally satisfy me. If I did so, I did it with sensitivity. So I learned this from Tony. It also taught me not to micromanage. Well, since we mentioned Italians and relationships, it reminds me of a story. There was a wealthy married male who was having an encounter with this young relationship with this young Italian woman for a few years. And after one of their rendezvous, she informed him she was pregnant. And so, as not to spoil his reputation, he said he would, for her to go back to Italy, and he would, when the child was born, he would pay a large sum of money until the child was 18 or went on to higher education. So she said, okay, so about 9 months later, he said, well, how do I know when the child is born? She asked. He said, just send me a postcard and on it put spaghetti, and I'll know the child is born. So about 9 months later, the postcard arrived at the door, and his wife picked it up and said, honey, you've got a very strange postcard here from Italy. He said, oh, just put it there and I'll look at it and I'll tell you about it later. So he looked at the postcard, and on it said, spaghetti, spaghetti, spaghetti. 2 with meatballs and 1 without. So he turned white and fainted. Reflection number 6, Dr. Baker and Dr. Goldie. Well, like many of you all, during my residency, I developed my strongest relationships of any period except for my family. And these have been important because these have continued on now for more than 5 decades. I've had the opportunity to be with our residents, former residents, for the last 5 years with our Piedmont Orthopedic Society in Greece, Sea Island, Kiowa, Ocean Reef. We've got a very strong alumni society. Well, it would sound too much like our president if I'd say it's the best, but it is probably the best in orthopedic surgery. It's been a loyal group. We have a fund, as many of you all know, established called the Bill Hardiker Fund. All of our residents who train at Duke get their and their spouse wives paid to attend one of these meetings while they're still in training. And I hope this continues, but not only continues, but strengthens. Well, like many of you all, I learned more from the resident just ahead of me and my chief resident than any other of my mentors. That's kind of the way this hierarchical relationship was. I'm sure many of you all have or will have these learning relationships in your residency. We spent more time together than we do with anybody else, and now not so much. You guys only work 80 hours a week. But we developed this trust or bond, and we had the same passion to learn to become good orthopedic surgeons. They say if you love it, you'll learn it. But Dr. Baker, my first chief, he was head of orthopedics for 30 years and sports medicine for 30 years. He was harsh, but a fair taskmaster. He had these piercing eyes, you can see. You're almost frightened just to look at his portrait, let alone him. But he would kick me one moment underneath the operating table, and then he'd call me home at night and said, I love you, boy. He called us all boy. Even when I was 50, 60 years old, he called me boy. We all respected Dr. Baker for his stern leadership, but I learned from a negative way about some mannerisms, because Dr. Baker sometimes would humiliate or even degrade some of us in front of others. For example, I had these long sideburns when I was a resident, not as long as Elvis Presley, but they were in style then. And he grabbed me one time right here and said, in front of a bunch of nurses, because in the clinic, in front of a private clinic, a bunch of nurses and other people, he grabbed me right there and said, boy, you know what that is? And I said, yes, sir, that's the anti-helix. He said, that's right, boy. And that's where your sideburns are supposed to stop. Those sideburns are all right for rock stars, cowboys, and stagecoach drivers, but not orthopedic residents. He was also ultra-conservative. For example, he never let any of us, we couldn't live in Chapel Hill because he said there's nothing but liberals, hippies, whores, and prostitutes. I don't know what to live in Chapel Hill. Y'all heard that. He was a real close friend of Jesse Helms, you know, our United States Senator. They were very close. You heard what Jesse said about Chapel Hill, didn't you? When they were getting ready to build the zoo over in Asheboro, he said, we don't need to build a zoo in Asheboro, we just have to put a fence around Chapel Hill and call it a zoo. So, anyway, that was Dr. Baker. Dr. Goldner was actually the greatest teacher I ever had. I learned a great deal about doctor-patient relationships from Dr. Goldner. He really took the time with each patient, no matter their financial or social status. He listened to them. He was a great listener. Well, I don't know if you saw a recent study. How long does a doctor usually listen to a patient before he interrupts? 14 seconds. That wasn't Dr. Goldner. I learned the importance of always touching the patient, sitting down when appropriate, listen to them, obtain a very thorough history and a complete physical exam. Dr. Goldner was also very positive. He believed you were entitled to his opinion. But as they say, young people know the rules, and Dr. Baker and Dr. Goldner, they knew the exceptions. It was certainly true of them. Dr. Goldner also epitomized the old saying, they may forget, you've heard this before, may forget what you've said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. By the way, regarding role models, when I was 7 years old, I had classic rheumatic fever and spent 3 or 4 months home in bed. And my doctor, Dr. Joe, came by to see me every day at home. And that's what influenced me. When I was 7 years old, I was going to be a doctor from then on, and never changed. I think he might have been having a kind of a platonic relationship with my grandmother, but I look back on it. Well, reflection. So I learned this from Dr. Baker, you know, praise the public, criticize them, private. I learned it in a negative way. Reflection number 7. My residency was interrupted by 2 years when I went into the United States Navy. And I spent this 2 years on Capitol Hill. My office was right underneath a rotunda. I was the attending physician to the United States Senate, House of Representatives and Senate, and also the Supreme Court. And what I learned from all this being there for 2 years, I really learned how hardworking these congressmen were. They really did. They were dedicated, really dedicated to serving our country. Not like many of the comments you read now, but they seemed to be more proactive in those days. I was only 28 years old at the time. I became very comfortable treating and advising these leaders in our political world. And my office was actually an escape for them, apolitical, and they often confided in me. I developed and maintained strong relationships with many of these congressmen, which I maintained long after I left Capitol Hill. Time doesn't permit me to tell some stories of interest about them, but I will say that these distinguished congressmen made a lasting impression on me because of their devoted commitment to our country. Well, many of them shied away from fanfare, believe it or not. Now, since my good friend Jack Nicholas told me not to drop names, I won't. Well, times have changed. As last year, Joe Manchin, who's our junior senator from West Virginia, complained, quotes, "Nobody knows anybody in Washington anymore. It's amazing. There just aren't enough relationships. You have to build relationships, even if they're not perfect." The Senate, I don't know if you've seen this book written by Trent Lott and Tom Daschle. They were head of the respective parties in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's a current book, Crisis Point, and what they emphasize, the lack of developing relationships in Washington in recent years. They blame it some on the airplanes. Everybody comes home on the weekend. They used to dine and party together, interchange Republicans and Democrats. They used to eat together in the Senate and House dining rooms. They don't do that anymore. They're not developing relationships. Well, many fascinating relationships served me well in Washington, D.C., and one was not actually on Capitol Hill. I used to go to Tuesday night at Georgetown with Professor Hyde, who was the head of orthopedics. That was the orthopedic grand rounds. I went there for 2 years. I sat next to this elderly gentleman named Laszlo Ormandy. He was a brother of Eugene Ormandy, who had the Philadelphia Philharmonic Symphony. He spent 1 year in orthopedics at Duke in the 1950s. And he died at the age of 90, and I used to help him put his coat on and his cane and everything. But he died at the age of 93 and left orthopedic surgery to $3 million for the Laszlo Ormandy chair. So that was certainly a rewarding relationship indeed. Now, reflection number 8, International Fellows, Tony Sieber and the residents. Well, I joined the Duke Orthopedic faculty in 1969, and we had just started taking international fellows about that time. Dr. Goldner assigned me to these international fellows, and I was trying to get started with my practice and my research and everything, and I said, why me? We had a resident, the other residents called him Why Me. He was always saying, why me? Why me? They didn't call me Why Me. But, so it was somewhat difficult at first because I was trying to do these other things. And I said, why put this on me, all these international fellows? But subsequently, these international fellows became one of the greatest rewards of me being in academic medicine. We trained over 80 international fellows from more than 20 countries. The first fellow was sent here actually by Mary Duke Biddle Trent Siemens, the last of the Duke family. God bless her, she was a wonderful, great lady. Well, as Dean mentioned, we eventually, there still are 7 chairmen of academic programs in Greece, and we trained 5 of them here at Duke. And it spawned similar relationships with other universities. For example, the University of Pittsburgh, University of Southern Cal, University of Pennsylvania, Wake Forest Medical College of Virginia, New Mexico, and so on. And these combined contributions to orthopedic surgery have been voluminous. It all got started here. Well, we were fortunate to have a team of leaders in the laboratory to nurture these international fellows. Tony Sieber, who has passed on, he never had more than a high school education. He had a great English accent, so he calmed a lot of people. Tony was a compassionate and caring individual, and he helped our international fellows rent apartments, buy their automobiles, helped them with their love life, their girlfriends. I mean, he developed a deep relationship with all of these fellows, really. And he was relationship personified. I learned a lot from Tony about compassion and giving care by including their families and not just being concerned about their academic productivity. We actually won the Kappa Delta Award, the highest research award in orthopedic surgery, from a team made up of an Iranian, a Brit, a Chinese researcher, and a Polak. All dear friends. I always made it a point to give them my time and attention, as Chris mentioned, and emphasize how important they were. I never had them wait on me. If it was going to be more than 10 or 15 minutes, I called them. I appreciated their time and value, as there was a deep feeling of ownership by all of them. Well, 10 to 20% of the residents required 80 to 90% of my time. These are the ones that were difficult. We don't have them anymore, like we did then. But our goal was always to help them to be better residents, not run their lives. It's similar with patients, as I mentioned. 10 to 20% of your patients require 80% of your time. In both instances, it's important to listen and have them develop a trust in you. Actually, if all residents were great, teaching would be easy and we'd have no challenges. Well, during my 17 or 18 years as head of orthopedics, we had very few outliers. But I did find it necessary to dismiss 3 of them, which were trying times. But I will say that all 3 of them accepted their change in pathways of training to another specialty as gentlemen. None of them were women at the time. We worked this out together. I did not just drop them. Now you get an email or a Twitter. I actually had no favorites of residents. Once a month in those days, I used to go to a crippled children's clinic in Clinton, North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, and see 20 Marines, and then on to Morehead City to see them on the next morning. We went on Friday, came back on Saturday. We spent the weekends together, spent more than 8 or 9 hours in the car riding together with 2 or 3 residents. We had meals together, a few beers and wine, and spent the night together. Obviously, it was a great chance to get to know our residents. And in the summer, sometimes they brought their wives and their spouses and children down for the weekend. The chief resident would ask me who I wanted to go to the clinic with, and I always said, you pick them. Sometimes I thought I was going to have to spend a trying time with some of the difficult residents. Some were even a little odd in ways in those days. And I thought it might be a taxing weekend. But this really was never the case. I found out how wrong I was in my primary early judgment of them, and after spending this time together, seeing patients, dining and wining, sometimes swimming, fishing, golfing, I learned that our differences were mainly my weakness in judgment. They were all good, for sure. We developed a better relationship for the next 3 or 4 years of their training. And remind me of the book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, A Team of Rivals, which Lincoln picked the 5 of his staunchest political adversaries to be members of his cabinet, and together they made accomplishments during the most difficult time of our history. Also another book, The Heroic Story of Sir Ernest Shackleton, who one historian said he was the greatest leader ever to come across God's earth, bar none. From 1914 to 1916, he saved the lives of all 27 men on this ship. They were shipwrecked for almost 2 years. One particular act he did, he picked the 2 least desirable men and he slept with them for almost 2 years in a small pup tent. Think about that. Well, I recall a former resident who did not agree with me on some decision I made. He called me an uncomplimentary name. Our friendship was temporarily broken. A couple years later, I gave him special recognition at one of our annual alumni meetings. He was shocked that I would praise him. But what did I learn from this? Don't let a little dispute destroy a good friendship or relationship. And the best way to get rid of your enemies is to turn them into your friends. We've since helped each other academically and professionally in many ways, and I also recently supported him for a national position. As my mom used to say, forgiveness does not change the past, but it sure can enlarge the future. Good from Mom. Reflection number 9. It's important to enjoy the people you work around every day, clinic, office, operating room. And I always made an effort to say thank you when I left the operating room. These comments of gratitude were appreciated more than I can emphasize. I once read in a local newspaper that an executive from a small town in Ohio who made some money gave the profits to those his employees as a bonus. In other words, he shared his success with those who helped him get there. And I kept this in mind when if I ever got some extra money, one day I would do the same. Well, I did receive some academic financial awards, and not only did I distribute this money to people that helped me, I include the operating room personnel, x-ray people, orthopedic residents, etc. But over a period of years, I gave them about 125 each, 4 or 5 years, these breakers, jackets, vests, and warm-ups. Of course, this was a very popular gesture, but I stress it was not just the material gifts that bonded our relationships, but I believe there was a genuine feeling of being appreciated and even more so of belonging. Well, from a different angle, true story. Every Sunday morning, we used to have grand rounds. I had to go in every Sunday. And I had a white coat on, and I would drive by this one place. There was a one-legged gentleman who was selling newspapers for $1.50. $1.50. So I'd give him the $1.50, but I never took the newspaper. Just told him to keep the $1.50. He kept saying thanks, Doc, for a couple of years, and then after a month or two, he kept telling me thanks, Doc, and so I quit saying thanks, Doc. So I stopped one day and said, you know, you used to tell me thank you. You don't do that anymore. He said, Doc, the newspapers are $1.75 now. So this wasn't, I wouldn't call that a passionate relationship. So just as it's important to show appreciation, it's also important not to offend others. If you want to be a winner, it's certainly not wise to offend the individuals you most need on your side. Some of you know people like that. It takes an idiot to do that. It just doesn't make sense. Just remember when I remember when I was a child, I never could figure out why they had kamikaze pilots who wore helmets. It didn't make sense. I don't know, you know, some people seem to look for fault in others, as if they get a reward for it. Well, I've learned not to look to stir up trouble. You'll only be the real loser. It's a waste of time. Relative to this, we all have bad moods at times, and this is what Chris mentioned. Don't mix bad moods with bad words, right? You have plenty of opportunities to change your mood, but you'll never be able to replace the words that you spoke. And again, Chris, thanks for reminding me. It's important to listen to residents and faculty. You learn more from listening and talking. As I noted, I served on several executive committees and boards, and I actually took the posture for 2 or 3 years, not to say much. I was younger then than most of them, so I followed the principle: the skill of listening is greater than the skill of speaking. And to listen, for even a fool is right sometimes. You don't have to be noisy to be effective. Sometimes you're the most popular person in the room if you keep your mouth shut and listen. And it must have worked because I was eventually selected as a leader on several of these boards. It's also not a good idea to try to be the smartest guy in the room. If you are, invite somebody else, 1 or 2 or 3 smarter than you are. We've heard the expression, it's lonely at the top. Well, I did not find this so, for if you stay connected with your friends that got you there, it's not lonely. I never believed in this axiom, eagles soar alone. It's good for leadership. Although when the storms come, the birds look for shelter, the eagles go above the clouds. But when I was in Turkey a few years ago, I came across this old Turkish proverb: no road is long with good company. You have to get to know those you lead. Let them know you care about them. I recall many years ago, before I was married, I was a resident. Dr. Goldner called me on Christmas Day because he knew I was alone. And that certainly meant a lot to me. Reflection number 10. Some points on leadership. I've learned not to use words like absolutely, always, perfect, for we know these states rarely exist in real life. Instead, I prefer expressions with vision or commitment. I've always particularly liked that TV ad with the military. It says, be all you can be. It says and means a lot. In fact, I used to get tears in my eyes every time I saw it. By the way, I wasn't in the Army, I was in the Navy, for you guys. It's important to connect emotionally as well as intellectually, even when you're talking on the telephone. As I inform my staff to be sure and smile, because they can hear it in your words. And y'all know that's true when you talk to somebody. Now the damn thing is you call them to get a robot copy. Like, it's very irritating, but that's the new life. But they can hear this smile or see it. When I was head orthopedics, I had 3 administrative assistants, secretaries, who didn't answer the phone well. So I had them all had to get all the secretaries in orthopedics go take a course on how to answer the phone, smile, and everything. What happened? The 3 that I had the course for didn't attend the course. Really, they thought they didn't need it. And I had the whole course for them and they didn't even go. So these genuine expressions of emotional connection, they're difficult on text messages and emails. I prefer direct eye-to-eye contact, a firm handshake. I also feel it's more important for the leader to work harder than anyone else. Actually, I took a call once a week until I was 68 years of age. However, I really enjoyed it, except for the occasional inconvenience. I've always chosen not to separate work and play because I enjoy both of them. Obviously, that's why I'm still here. I'm still a Duke. That's why I'm up here talking to you on this position. I've really enjoyed it. Persistence. It's a key attribute. I know we rewrote several NIH grants 3 or 4 times before they were accepted. It was well worth it because we were funded for 25 to 30 years in our lab. I'm reminded of Michael Jordan. It's kind of hard to believe it. He said he took 26 shots before he made the winning field goal, before he finally made one. You've got to be persistent. It takes some calculated risks. For example, our adventures into microsurgery at Duke, where we were kind of pioneers. We were the first, or not the first, orthopedic surgeons to use microsurgery. Some of our developments failed, but a few of them revolutionized the way we manage severe musculoskeletal injuries and diseases. As they say, we may have lost the game sometime, but we did not lose the lesson. Well, in closing, a doctor always, medical education, and I really mean this, needs more role models of compassion, caring, and giving physicians. It is especially true in this age of electronic medical records and electronic images and communication. There's less hands-on, less examples of service and compassion for medical students and residents to follow our lead. And they do follow. In our relationships with working with our patients, it's important, as you see here, you've heard this before, patients first want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. This theme was so well portrayed in Patch Adams with Robin Williams. In our profession, patients share a confidence with us that few others are fortunate to experience. It's a treasured relationship. We need to remind ourselves that our genuine compassion, morality, and ethics are essential ingredients to maintain this trust, or else yours, our profession, will crumble. It's a recent study here on occupations and what the public thought about it. You see, nurses rank the highest, 82%, have high standards, high ethical values. Military officers, 71, you guys ought to like that. Grade school teachers, 66. Doctors were 4th at 65. So we've got some work to do, man. Who's the lowest, you think? Lobbyists, 8%. Who's next to lowest? Lawyers and business executives. Just a little bit higher, 10% was all they were. So you're in the right profession. Well, it's a privilege and a joy to provide a caring service. So my life to me has not been a job, but really a way of living. As you all know, the word doctor comes from docere, the Latin, which means to teach. I could only be one of 3 professions: teacher, coach, or physician. And And even though I'm no longer in active practice, I can assure you that 1/3 to 1/2 of my day, often on the weekends, not often on the weekends, on every weekend, I respond to individuals who are seeking care of some kind. I am what I am, a doctor, so I don't push it off to somebody else. I make the call or connection myself to connect it with a physician or someone that they're looking for in their particular specialist. Most of them aren't orthopedics, really. Some of you maybe know this. If not, check me out. Try not to do it on the weekend. But not only must we have trust and respect in our colleagues, but the patient, but for patients needs to be in everyday life. I mean, Chris, you alluded to this. Look at the improper discretions and behaviors of some of our prominent politicians, mayors, governors, senators, cabinet members, athletic coaches, doctors, players, priests, TV stars, news commentators, military recruiters, even high-ranking officers. Not the right kind of relationships. If we want to instill a strong and lasting legacy, it was Mark Twain who stated, "You are what you are when no one else is looking." Just like that golf ball in the woods. You can move it, or you can play by the rules. As Aristotle said, you are what you repeatedly do. No question about it. Well, a Pew study a few years ago on trust revealed that the millennium generation have less trust in their fellow men. Only 19%, 1 out of 5, say most people can be trusted. Their friends can be trusted. Well, why? It's really not known. Some people said increased diversity. Some people said low economics. But what is it? I think it's no face-to-face contact, electronic communications. The internet, no question, it's a great way of communicating, but it's not a replacement for relationships, direct contact for relationships and accountability. Without a doubt, as I mentioned, medicine is losing some of its humanity because of the massive electronic systems. I'm not against it, but I'm saying, I mean, I go to the doctor myself. He doesn't even look at me. He's looking at the computer all the time, let alone touch me. However, this decline in trust is not unique to our profession, medicine. Pew study in 1958 showed 73% trusted the government to do what was right. Last year, it dropped to 18% trusted the government to do right. If you took the poll now, it'd be less than that, I believe, in 2018. Well, my last one, reflection number 12. Of course, my most powerful and rewarding relationship has been Buff, my wife, who's a Duke graduate. I met her when I was a resident here. And I've said so many times that compassion and giving in the nursing tradition, because she has this, she's made me a happy man for sure. Well, I've offered some of my reflections on how powerful these relationships in my life, that is father, teammates, classmates, coaches, teachers, internationals, residents, colleagues, patients, and family have influenced or defined my career. And this story is not about what I've done or accomplished, but rather what I've learned or benefited from these relationships, some which have become an integral part of me, for sure. Trusting relationships are the key to any success in any field. Success depends on quality relationships, not only we develop, but maintain. Now, some of my comments have seemed too personal, and some of them have. I apologize. But it's my way of saying thanks to so many friends who've had such a meaningful part of my life. And time only deepens these reflections and relationships. So finally, in the words of Tony Spadoni, keep it a go. Thanks. don't know if you want any questions or not, but
Absolutely.
I'll take them. I can't
David,
answer
we have
those
time for
questions.
questions.
Yeah, we have a couple. We could take a
Yeah.
couple.
Questions for Dr. Bannon. First, Jim, thank you for sharing that with the scholars. I think those things. Questions for Dr. Bannon at this point. Okay.
Thank you for the amazing talk. I just wanted to see, obviously some of it was built into that with the personal interactions and things of that nature. But do you have any other pearls for, while as busy as you work clinically, finding the time and quality time to keep these relationships as strong as they were?
You know, it was hard. I did work hard, and I never slept much. And so you got to be able to get along without sleep. I do now. I really do now. But you know, I never knew what jet lag was. I never knew. I mean, I could fly halfway around the world, come back, because I was always tired, and I never knew it. It wasn't until I was 68 or 69 I quit taking call, and all of a sudden I felt, well, this is the way you're supposed to feel. I felt tired all my life. My back hurt and everything bothered me, you know. But I thought that was natural. But you take it, you know, particularly your kids. I had a son that played ball, and one of the early years I didn't go see him, and that was the greatest mistake I ever made. He went his last couple of years in prep school to watch him play, but I should have done it earlier because those days were gone. You can't recover. So it's difficult. You have to. You know, I live by the clock and schedules, and I didn't put my stuff in my phone to remind me stuff. Dean knows I have these little brown books about the size of the phone. I've had them since 1969, and they had all my schedule in them. And I wrote things down for the day here, all my schedule, all the patients, all my op schedule, so I can look back 35 years from now and tell you who operated on such and such a day. Now you say, well, why do? But it's. I was head orthopedics at the VA for 14 years or so, and they got sued for some patient, and they were going to sue me. Well, I pulled out my little brown book that I had since 1969. I said I wasn't even in the country when that happened. I wouldn't have had that if I'd been on the phone. See, so yeah, you have to. You have to be compulsive and live by schedule. Schedule, right? So, but give the time to the family. It really is the most important thing. Okay.
I mean, what you've done is resonate so strongly with the theme of relational leadership, which is what we're exploring over the next few years. On behalf of all of us, thank you again.
Okay.